Hello, welcome to Lit with Lloyd. I am your host, Lloyd Russell, and today we have a real treat. We have Sheldon Siegel, who has written a series of books about attorneys in San Francisco, legal murder mysteries, would you say?
Yes.
Okay. They're great books, and Sheldon and I go back a ways, so it's a real pleasure to have him here, and welcome, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Great. Okay. First question, or it's a comment followed by a question. One of the things I've noticed in your books is how well developed your characters are. And in particular, you have a blood spatter expert that is very well developed. Tell us how you came up with that particular character.
I was trying to think of the most brilliant person I knew on planet Earth, and the first person who came to mind was a character that I named Lloyd Russell, who, of course, in my book has multiple PhDs and is a professor emeritus at Berkeley, and plays a pivotal role in at least one of my books, and will probably be reappearing before too long.
Well, I have to say that I really have no idea what a blood spatter expert is, but I don't care because I'm happy to be in the book.
Well, and I am happy to have you, and I want you to know your character has tested very well with my readers. They really like you, so you're going to have to become a recurring character.
Okay, now we can turn a little bit more serious. It seems like there are a fair amount of attorneys that end up writing novels. Why do you think that is? I mean, I know you guys do a lot of writing, but what prompted you to start writing novels?
Yeah, there are a lot of attorneys who do this, and even more in about the last 25 years. The modern era of the lawyer novel probably started in 1986 when Scott Turow did Presumed Innocent, and a couple years later John Grisham did The Firm. And if you talk to a lot of the lawyer authors, their story is somewhat similar to mine, which is when I was thinking about maybe I should write a book, I had just read Presumed Innocent, and I thought, well, if I ever get around to writing the book that I probably will never write, I'd like to do a courtroom novel. The reality of it is the courtroom novel genre is not new. You know, it didn't start with Turow. Perry Mason was around long before that, and Anatomy of a Murder, which I still view as one of the greatest lawyer books of all time, if not the very best, and also an excellent movie. Which won multiple Oscars. That book was written in 1958.
Wow.
Which coincidentally is the year that I was born. So if your viewers haven't read it or rented the movie, they really should. As far as how I got started, I always wanted to write novels, going back to maybe high school, and I don't know why. And I've talked to other writers about this, and the answer is usually about the same, which is it's sort of hot wired into our system that maybe we should try to do this. And it's a bit presumptuous because you have to go on the assumption that you have something that people might be interested in reading, and that isn't necessarily always the case. But a lot of us want to try it, and even more so with the success of a lot of the lawyer writers along the way. So when I finally got around to writing the story that I was probably never going to write, I decided I would try to write a courtroom drama set in San Francisco.
And when you actually did the writing, because you at that time especially, you were a very active attorney, and you were taking the ferry right from Marin County to San Francisco. Is that where you actually started your writing?
It is. That's not just publicity from my publishers over the years, but I started writing my first book, Special Circumstances, on a laptop on the Larkspur Ferry in 1995. my wife, Linda, who's been very supportive about all of my creative endeavors, bought me this fancy laptop because she got tired of hearing me talk about writing a novel someday. And she said, I'm going to give you this laptop, go write your novel and come back when it's done. And I found out later that she figured I would quit after 2 weeks and give her the laptop back. But I fooled her, and I set a goal for myself of finishing the first draft of this book by my 40th birthday, which was July 14th, 1998. And I beat my deadline by 3 days.
Oh my gosh.
So I would encourage the aspiring writers out there to take advantage of your midlife crisis and write a book. And there's nothing in my background that would suggest that I would be good at this. I was a full-time lawyer at the time with a big firm in San Francisco. I've worked for big firms for 35 years in San Francisco. And in real life, I'm a corporate lawyer. I do not do criminal work or even civil litigation. I studied accounting in college, and I don't have a drawer full of short stories or manuscripts. The first book I wrote was the first book that was published. And, if you get pulled over for a traffic stop, I'm the wrong guy to call because I really have never handled a criminal case. Fortunately, I get help from my friends who are public defenders and prosecutors and judges and some police officers, and of course, experts on various fields, including blood spatter experts.
Tell us about your protagonists and how many books have you written in the series?
Yeah, well, I've written 13 books in the series featuring Mike Daly and Rosie Fernandez. They are what I used to call small-time criminal defense attorneys, but later in the series they become a little more big-time. Mike, the stories are told by Mike, who is, now he's younger than I am. When the book started, he was a little older than I was. Mike is a guy from San Francisco, originally from the Mission, but grew up in the Sunset. He was a public defender. That didn't work out. He was a priest. That didn't work out. He went to law school. That worked out. He also is an ex-husband and an ex-partner at a big firm in downtown San Francisco, similar to the firm where I've worked for many years, but our firm is much nicer. He practices law in the early books with his ex-wife, Rosie Fernandez, native of the Mission, San Francisco State, Hastings Law School. She was the best public defender in the San Francisco Public Defender's Office eons ago, and she mentored Mike after he got out of the priesthood, and they were very good at being lawyers. They were not so good when they decided to get married. The marriage did not last, but their relationship did. They have 2 kids, and they're very good parents. They live a short distance from each other in Marin County. And they are, in my mind, the lawyers you would call if you really got into trouble. They're also, at least in the early books, the only honest lawyers on planet Earth. In the first book, Special Circumstances, they say you should write about what you know, and I wrote a story about a murder in a big law firm. And after finishing that book, I realized that it's a story about a murder in a big law firm, but it really is a story about Mike and Rosie and their relationship and how that evolves over time and over the course of the series.
Well, I would like to point out that I've read all of them even before I appeared in them. So they're great books, but you also have one other book that you wrote, and tell us about that one.
Yeah, I wrote a non-series book set in my hometown of Chicago. It's called The Terrorist Next Door. It's the story of what might happen if someone decides to try to essentially shut down the cell phone grid in a big city. And I had promised my mom, because I grew up in Chicago, I promised her that I would write a story set in Chicago on the southeast side where I grew up. And after writing at that time, I think 11 books with an ex-priest as the protagonist, I decided that I would have a Jewish protagonist because my mom wanted me to do that. And I learned from that you should always listen to your mother.
I know you just said that it's basically a standalone, Will you write another book about that character?
Yeah, I've been meaning to go back to that. It was intended to be the start of a new series, and in fact, I got about 100 pages into a sequel, and then I got busy with the San Francisco stories again, so I had to put that aside. But after I finish, I'm working on the 14th San Francisco book, and I think I know what the 15th is going to be about. And then I do want to go back and try to finish the second Chicago story. And I would envision that, I think, as at least a trilogy, and maybe a few more if I can do it.
Good. I'd like to see a sequel, please.
I promise. It is forthcoming.
Okay. And when did you move here from Chicago?
Oh, yeah. I came to law school at Berkeley. I grew up originally from the southeast side. We moved to the suburbs in 1970 when I was 12. I went to college at the University of Illinois in Champaign, and then I moved out here in 1980 to go to law school at UC Berkeley. And that was fortuitous because it didn't snow here. And I also met my wife, Linda, there, who was an undergrad while I was in law school. We met in a parking lot in Berkeley. We will celebrate our 34th anniversary this year. And Linda got her degree in computer science and then an MBA and spent about 25 years doing computer graphics for Industrial Light and Magic, and so that is how we ended up in Marin. And she had a really interesting job working for George Lucas for many years.
Oh, I can imagine. Tell us now about the publishing process. Yours seems to run across several levels and different approaches, and I think we all would like to know about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've kind of done it every which way. My first 7 books I did with traditional publishers, which I think was good because when you start in the publishing world, it's very helpful to have experienced editors to take you through the process. And I did my first 2 books with Bantam Dell, which was an imprint at Random House. And my editor was Ann Harris, who had been there for 30 years, and she edited The Exorcist and Betty Ford's autobiography.
Whoa.
So when Anne told me to change a comma, I changed the commas. Then I did 3 books with Putnam, and of course Random House and Putnam have now merged into. And then my editor there was Neil Nyren, who's also a very experienced, wonderful editor. And Neil also edited Tom Clancy and Clive Cussler and Dave Barry and all these really high-end authors. So he really had a good eye for the stories and what I was doing. Unfortunately, after the 5th book, the sales had plateaued, and I did 2 more in the series with a smaller publisher in San Francisco called McAdam Cage, and they went out of business during the Great Recession. So I was 7 books into a series. I had put 5 of them on the New York Times list and made 7 figures in royalties. And at that point, I was essentially without a publisher. And that was a very difficult time, but that's a really good career for most authors. So I kept writing, and around 2010, I also started reacquiring the rights to all my old books. And I got them all back. Took about 3 years.
Wow.
And it was about that time where Amazon was starting to had started their independent self-publishing imprint called not ACX. It'll come to me. In any event, I re-edited all of the earlier books and kept writing. And in 2014, and Linda did new covers with help from some people who used to design movie posters at Lucasfilm. And we re-released the entire series in 2014 independently. And we do all of the books now ourselves. And there have been 6 more since then. And it was about that time where Amazon released the iPad, and then everybody started, the iPhones came out and all the smartphones came out, and ebooks and digital reading became a huge, huge deal. So our timing was very fortuitous. And so we're doing it all ourselves now. It doesn't work for everybody, but I had exactly the right product for the current environment. And remarkably and very thankfully for us, I'm actually now selling more books and making more in royalties than I did when my books were on the New York Times list.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a different world in the publishing universe now.
How would that even happen? How does you get the word out to so many people to buy books that'll buy the books?
Well, I had a huge advantage because I already had an audience. And I already had 7 books in a series that people liked, and they were waiting for more. And in the current marketing environment, you can do a lot online that you can no longer, you can still try to do at bookstores, which I love bookstores, I love libraries, but the reach, particularly of Amazon in the publishing industry, is so huge. And in genre fiction, ebooks are the biggest part of the market, not just for guys like me, for John Grisham and, Scott Turow and all the big hitters. And even more so since COVID happened, because people have been staying home, and anybody who didn't know how to download or order a physical book from Amazon has learned how to do that. And I don't agree with everything Amazon does, but they have created opportunities for writers that just simply didn't exist 5, 10, and certainly 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember meeting with my original publisher at Bantam Dell in 1999 when I got my first book deal before the book came out, and I said, "Do you think the ebook thing will ever be anything?" And he looked me right in the eye and said, "No, it's never going to happen. People just aren't going to read on those things." And so, it's a different world.
Not true.
Yeah. But we've also adapted. I'm very fortunate because Linda has a tech background, so we can adapt very quickly to changes in the market. And, if you could do special effects on Forrest Gump, you could figure out how to format an ebook. It wasn't a big stretch. But even the indie market has changed a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, and we've tried to adapt to that as we've gone. For example, 5 years ago, Amazon did not offer paid advertising on their site to indie authors, and I don't think they even offered it to the big publishers. And now, if you want to have any chance of selling a lot of books on Amazon, you almost have to pay for advertising on the Amazon site in one form or another.
Wow. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back shortly.
Thank you to the City of Montessorino for their continued support of KCAT Public Media. The City of Montessorino has enabled KCAT to inspire, educate, entertain, and inform our community through the magic of television and digital media for over 38 years. Thank you.
And we're back with Sheldon Siegel. I forgot to ask you an earlier question, and it's really an important question because south side of Chicago, and now you've lived twice as long in the Bay Area. Is it the White Sox or the Giants?
Oh, it's still the White Sox.
It is.
It is. I've lived here for 42 years now, and I've thought about that over the years because, if I had just changed allegiances, at least after Michael Jordan retired, I could have had I would have had a much happier life if I had just adopted the Bay Area teams. I will say this, once the Chicago teams are eliminated, which tends to happen pretty early for most of them, I immediately hop onto the bandwagon for the Bay Area teams. So, I'm going to stick with my home team, my hometown teams for now, but it's much easier to be a bandwagon fan. There's no pressure. And of course, my kids and my wife are all Bay Area fans. They're all Giants fans. Huh. And there was a period of, 5 years there where the Giants won 3 World Series, and they think this happens all the time. My White Sox have won 1 World Series. In 1917 they won. In 1919 they threw the World Series.
Correct.
And then they won again as recently as 2005. So,
well, that's twice then. So
it is.
Okay.
It is.
Not bad. Okay. I want to actually mention something that I know is very hard, and if it's not something that you want to talk about, feel free. But your law firm is in San Francisco, and a few years back you did have a very harrowing experience there. Do you mind talking about that?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Happy to talk about
Please.
that. In July of 1993, I was working at the Pettit and Martin firm in the 101 California office tower, and many of your viewers who have been around for a while may recall that on July 1st of 1993, at our firm, one of our former clients who had gone mad came into the firm armed with an Uzi and pistols, and he walked down the hall and he shot and killed 8 people and wounded several others, and one other person died a couple of years later. We think it was because we're related to his wounds, and I mean, it was just horrible. It was one of those experiences. Now I can talk about it because it was almost 30 years ago, and it's kind of a out of body thing for me,
Yeah. But you were on another floor at the time, weren't you?
Yes, I was 2 floors above where the guy came through, and I was sitting in my office, and my secretary came by and said, she said she didn't know how to tell me this, but they're saying that there's a guy on the 34th floor with a gun and he's shooting people. And she said later, I looked at her like she was crazy, because you don't expect that on the 36th floor of an office building. And in those days, 30 years ago, also, there were not mass shootings every few days.
Yeah.
So I got very lucky. I got a bunch of us got behind a closed door in our personnel department, and the door locked, and there were probably 30 of us in there in an interior office, and we just waited it out for the next 2 hours. We knew it was a big problem. I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything, but we knew because the phones were working. But there were no cell phones back then. There was no internet back then. And so we waited for 2 hours, and the police were wonderful. They were just extraordinarily brave. I mean, it turns out the guy who'd done the shooting had killed himself in a stairway. The whole thing lasted about 20 minutes. So we waited out until the, until the police came by and said, all clear. And I don't know. I mean, I had an idea for a story about a murder in a big law firm before that event. And I thought, well, I was a little uncomfortable even thinking about it for the longest time. And the story that ended up in Special Circumstances, my first book, is a story about a murder in a big law firm, but not anything like what happened at Pettit and Martin. And we closed the firm 2 years later, and most of us moved over to the Shepherd Mullen firm where I am now. And it was at that point where I decided, if I'm ever going to write the novel that I probably will never write, this would be a good time to get started. So that is when I took my one creative writing class at Book Passage, our local Indian Marin County, and I did start seriously working on the book. And I can't tell you for sure if the events at the Pettit firm hadn't happened. I don't know, I probably would have tried to write a novel, but I don't know if I would have started when I did. And obviously, it's just one of those things.
How many floors did the law firm have in that building?
4.
And does anybody know why he picked that floor?
Well, oddly enough, our main entrance was on the 35th floor. And he got off the elevator on 34 because the elevator had stopped there. We think he was going to the 35th, and he saw the sign that said Pettit and Martin. So he got out and saw a conference room full of people.
Oh my gosh.
So I got lucky. I was on a different floor. If he had gone onto 35, there was also a big meeting going on in a bigger conference room, and those people probably would have been shot. And there's no playbook for this stuff.
Right.
He just went marching down the hall, and there were there were close calls. There were people who dove under their desks as he walked by, and he instead of coming up the staircase, he went down, and that's why he ended up he realized he was not going to get away, and so he committed suicide on the stairway.
Wow. Horrible stuff.
Really horrible stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Let's get back to more pleasant things, shall we? Your series of books would make a great TV series. Have you had any interest from a TV studio or a movie studio?
From time to time, we've gotten contacted. You know, it happens. And when the first book came out, we had a lot of interest because it was a first book and it was very heavily promoted by Bantam Dell at the time. But that was 2000 and the world was different. Then they were thinking feature film or maybe going to, you know, the networks. You know, in those days you started at CBS and ABC and then you worked your way down to the Hallmark Channel and then you worked your way to, you know, Novato Cable Access. So, you know, there was some interest back then. I had a big time movie agent at what was then Endeavor and now is William Morris, and he pitched it pretty hard for a few years, and then, you know, they have short attention spans. And then more recently, and then it kind of went cold, and my agent and I parted company, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, because he really wasn't looking. And we've had a lot more interest in the last 4 or 5 years because the environment has changed. Now you start at Netflix and Amazon, and, you know, if you can, and they do, at least they have been, you know, buying a lot of content. And so, you know, I'd love to see it happen. It would be a lot of fun if it did. The closest we ever got was when I wrote a pilot, because the Hollywood people they'll read, you know, a 40-page pilot. Uh-huh. They won't read a 400-page book. And the people who were looking at it said, you know, we really like this, but obviously you're not going to be the screenwriter. And I said, that's correct. I don't know what I'm doing, and I really don't want to stop writing novels to write screenplays. And they said, oh, okay, that's fine. And one of the reasons they decided not to do it was they didn't believe me. They thought I really wanted to be a screenwriter. And you know, I mean, I have great respect for people who do that. I think, you know, it's a different skill. And network TV in particular, where you got to observe very rigid covenants, you know, you have to put the commercials in the right place. There's certainly more flexibility now in the streaming services, but I'd love to see it happen. I think it would lend itself really well to, you know, to an extended series.
Yes.
You know, it's character-driven stuff. Right. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. If any of your viewers are in the TV business, we are open for business. And, you know, the rights are all available.
Would you ever consider going with a publisher at this point, or have you written that off for good?
You know, never say never, but the reality of it is I really like the way I'm doing things now. I have complete control over every aspect of the stories. I mean, creatively, from a business side, I'm not in competition with other authors at the same publishing house for release dates and for marketing money. You know, Linda and I made a commitment when we started doing this independently to do it ourselves. And to be honest, it would also be very difficult for a traditional publisher. They won't pick up a series midstream. Uh-huh. So in fact, I got a call out of the blue from a pretty big time New York agent a few weeks ago who said, you know, we noticed you're selling a lot of books. We think we can help you. And I told him, well, you know, the series books, I don't know that you guys can do it as well as I can. And he said, oh, well, you're going to have to write something new. And I said, I don't think you can match what I'm doing right now. And then I told him how much we were getting in royalties. And he said, you're right, I can't. But if you ever write a standalone, you know, or a new series, call us. And I said I would. I really like having, you know, I'm a lawyer. I really like having control over the whole process. And I mean, one of the big advantages is, you know, when the books are ready when I say they're ready, and we can release them in a matter of days. If I went with a traditional publisher today, and they signed me to a contract tomorrow, if the book was even written, which, you know, it probably would be, the likelihood that that book would be published before, you know, early 2024 is pretty remote. they work on an 18-month, at least an 18-month lag time.
Yeah.
I can't, I don't want to do that.
You can't, and you don't have to.
Yeah.
So you said that Linda handles the covers.
Yes.
Who picks the narrator for the audiobooks?
Oh, I do. Well, Linda and I do. We've worked with an absolutely spectacular narrator. His name is Tim Campbell. He is an actor in L.A., and when he's not performing, and he performs in the big theaters in L.A. He's very good. His wife is also a performer, and she is spectacular. But when they are not performing, and certainly during COVID, they had a lot of time, and Tim has done hundreds of books. That's kind of his sidelight. He has a studio in his house. They have really cute 1-year-old twins who I like watching them as he puts up pictures regularly. But that's another aspect of this that I really like, which is we get to pick our narrator, and we found a really good one. And he's done, I think, 11 of the 13 books. And he's done all the more recent ones. So we're going with Tim for as long as we can. And he's, got to pay for a lot of diapers. So we hope he's going to be sticking with us for a while.
So you just have one narrator per book, right?
Yes.
Or for all the books. I think that's great.
Well, and a good narrator makes a huge difference. I've listened to a lot of audiobooks, and, if you get someone who's really good and knows what they're doing, that process is really easy. I send him the manuscript, he records it, I listen to it, on the computer, and it's ready to go within a few days.
Wow.
And that process with traditional publishers takes months.
Yeah. Okay, so you said you've got books 14 and 15, you've got an idea for 15. You might do another David Gold. Do you ever see yourself branching out either into a new series or a standalone or a different genre?
I think there's a possibility of maybe a new crime novel story somewhere down the road. Every time I think I've exhausted Mike and Rosie, I come up with an idea for something new, or I see something in the paper, and it's weird because seems like when I get to about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through a manuscript, I get an idea for another book, and it's happened like 10 times now. And I always think the new idea is the greatest thing I've ever thought of. It never is, but that usually becomes the next book. So I have to discipline myself to make sure I finish what I'm working on, and then I get to start the next one. So I think Mike and Rosie are going to be busy for a few more years. I do want to do the second Chicago book, and I could see maybe doing another crime novel. I'm really not. It would be fun to do something different. All writers, I think, aspire to do literary stuff. I'm simply not qualified to do it. I studied accounting in college. And I tend to write the books, the kind of books that I like to read. And I write to entertain people on airplanes.
Well, as an avid fan, not only can you read them at any different spot in the series, but they're all very readable. They're not too long. They've got great peripheral characters that are not that peripheral. And it's a great series that I hope you continue writing for a long time, whether or not you have a blood spatter expert in them.
We're going to insist on a movie role for you, Lloyd.
I'll settle to see my name. And by the way, people, I was reading the book that I'm in. I was reading it because I'm one of the early readers for Sheldon's book after he gets it kind of ready. And when I saw my name in the book, I just about plotzed. And when I mentioned it to you, you said, you said, I've been waiting for you to get to that spot. So it was really a highlight for me in the literary world. So I appreciate that.
Well, I was happy to do it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's do a little bit of trivia. And this is a little bit different than my normal questions. And tell me if you want to throw some answers out. Don't feel obligated. The most read books of all time.
The most
read books. The books, the books that have been read the most.
Of mine or
of all time? No, of all time. All books.
Oh, or wouldn't it be the Bible?
The Bible is definitely in there. There are 11 of them.
Really?
Is there anything else that just and some of them are kind of series that it's not a solo book, but it's a series of books.
Oh. I wouldn't know. I would guess, a bunch of romance novels, but...
That's an interesting comment. None of them are romance novels.
Really?
That is interesting, although Agatha Christie is the best-selling author of all time besides the Bible and Shakespeare.
Oh, yes. I should have
2 billion books or something like that.
Wow.
So the other 10 are the Holy Quran, the Harry Potter series, the quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. I guess that's because they have 1.7 billion people in China. Lord of the Rings. This one really surprised me. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I read it. It didn't do much for me. I know it's popular, but I didn't know it was that popular.
Wow.
The Diary of Anne Frank. The Twilight Saga. Gone with the Wind. And here's another interesting one. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Really?
Yes, which is, for those of you who don't know it or recognize it, it's nonfiction. It's an older book. He probably wrote it in the 30s or 40s. And it's how to grow rich. So those are the 11, and a couple of them definitely surprised me.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, well, that'll do it for us. As I expected, I had high expectations for this being a really fun interview, and it exceeded it. It's just so great to have you. So thank you again for coming on.
Thanks very much, Lloyd. All
right. That's about all we've got. I want to thank KCAT because they're the best. They sponsor us. They make sure that they put very professional people behind the scenes. Thank you, Shan and Alex. And we'll see you next time.
You just heard Lit with Lloyd here on KCAT Radio. Explore all our KCAT original programming at kcat.org/radio.